Hi, I'm Dr. Neil Beck. I was a doctor in Perth, Western Australia for 53 years. First of all in the hospitals, and then for many years as a family doctor in the suburbs, where we did a lot of stuff in the early days because we hadn't had a medical school in Perth and were very short of doctors. So I helped to bring 800 babies into the world, and I did a lot of tonsillectomies and appendicectomies and vasectomies and broken bones and all sorts of things that are now done by specialists. Since we've had a medical school, originally to be a specialist doctor you had to go from Perth to London. Now we've got 3 medical schools in Perth, and everybody is trained locally. So what did I learn in the 500,000 consultations, home and hospital visits that I had in 53 years as a doctor? The main thing I learned was that the most important thing to have a good life is to be mentally healthy. Mental health is number 1 for having a good life, and number 2 is enough good relationships. So what is good mental health? Good mental health is mostly having good feelings, good thinking, good habits, good relationships, and that's it. So, but there was a great problem. The great problem was that there were not enough mental health and addiction workers to help all the people that needed help. There were lots and lots of people with mental health problems. There are no perfect mothers, no perfect fathers, no perfect families, homes, no perfect neighborhoods, no perfect schools. Everybody suffered some damage, suffering and damage, and needed to correct their problems and to become mentally healthy. And originally it was assumed that that could only be done by mental health workers, by counsellors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and there just weren't enough of those mental health workers. So many people got no mental health care who needed mental health care, and as far as I could see, almost nobody got enough mental health care. And problems cause problems which cause more problems. And the difficulty that I saw was that there were many blind spots in mental health care. They didn't look for causes. They didn't help people to know what they wanted and needed. They give them a diagnosis, but what they really needed to know was what they wanted to needed to have a better life. They treated people as if they were isolated solo souls, when mental health problems were nearly always family problems. There were so many blind spots in mental health care, and the tools were weak. There were only 2 mental health tools being used. One was medicines, and medicines had 2 big problems. The first big problem was that so many medicines were addictive. The people who needed medicines wanted them to work quickly to get better and to stop taking medicines, but the people who make medicines wanted troubled people to take as much medicine as possible for as long as possible. So the commonest mental health problem was worry, anxiety disorders, general anxiety, social anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, and phobias. And all the medicines for that commonest problem were addictive. Originally barbiturates, and then benzodiazepines and Ambien, Stilnox, all addictive. And sleep problems were common, and all the medicines for sleep problems were addictive. And another common problem was ADD, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and the three main medicines for that were addictive: Ritalin, dexamphetamine, Adderall. The main tool of medicines had the great weakness that so many medicines were addictive, and secondly, it had the problem that medicines worked so slowly. They nearly all came as tablets or capsules, and when you swallow a tablet or a capsule, it has to go right down your gut to get absorbed into your bloodstream to go to wherever it's needed, usually to your brain, but perhaps to somewhere else. And swallowed tablets and capsules take half an hour to an hour to start to be absorbed and start to help, and 1 to 2 hours to help a lot. So medicines were too slow. And the other tool in mental health was talk therapy, counseling, psychotherapy, call it what you like, talk therapy. And talk therapy had two big weaknesses. One is it was very slow. When I saw a new patient with mental health disorders and an addiction, I needed to spend an hour with them, and I just didn't have an hour. It was too slow. And the other problem with talk therapy was it's too expensive. To be a therapist, you have to have at least a 4-year university Bachelor of Psychology degree, and a lot of psychologists have a 6 or 7 year PhD, and to be a psychiatrist you have to have a 6-year general medical degree, a couple of years of general medical practice, then 3, 4 or 5 years of postgraduate psychiatric training. So those people all had to be university graduates, very smart people who spent a lot of time getting trained, and they needed to be paid well. They deserved to be paid well, and they needed to be paid well, or we'd be even shorter of them because they'd do something else. So the shortage of mental health workers and the number of people having to go without mental health care or without enough mental health care was because mental health care was so weakened by the fact that it had so many blind areas, and because the two main tools had such great weaknesses. So what could we do about that? In the late 1990s in Perth, we had a great epidemic of heroin. We'd always had tobacco and alcohol, but Perth is the most remote city in the world, and until we got a lot of aeroplane flights, we didn't get a lot of the other addictive chemicals. But then in the late 1990s we got heroin in a big way, and there were people dying everywhere from heroin overdoses. So I thought I had to learn about heroin, or I had to learn about addiction, because addiction was suddenly becoming such a common problem. Not just alcohol and tobacco, but many other addictions. So I started to work 10 hours a week in an addiction clinic. And I wanted to know what caused addiction, but the people in that clinic didn't know and didn't seem to think they should know. So I went to every addiction clinic in Perth and Sydney and couldn't find a single addiction worker who knew what caused addiction. Oh, they'd say things like, oh, they're just dickheads chasing highs. But they looked sick to me, and I believed I should know what caused addiction. And one day in the clinic where I was working 10 hours a week, I saw 15 heroin addicts, and 5 of them had undiagnosed, untreated ADD. And a lot of people thought that addiction caused mental health problems. Well, addiction makes mental health problems worse, and it may cause additional mental health problems, but the original problem, what comes first, is the mental health problems. That was clear in ADD, because the heroin addicts with ADD had ADD since they were young children, but they didn't develop their heroin addiction until their teens or 20s or 30s. When in desperation, because they didn't have their ADD, ADHD diagnosed and treated successfully, in desperation they got relief from their ADD distress by taking street drugs, and all the street drugs were addictive. A third of heroin addicts had ADD, but many people with mental health illnesses took other drugs as well, mainly alcohol, tobacco, ice, crystal meth, cocaine, and heroin and addictive painkillers, and yeah. So what I realized was it was very hard to help people to get better from their addiction if you didn't fix the cause, if you didn't find and fix the cause. And nobody was finding or fixing the cause, or seemed to think that was important. But I found when I treated people's mental health disorder at the same time as treating their addiction, which is called dual diagnosis, that a lot of them got better and didn't relapse. To get people off their addiction without finding and fixing the cause, what was happening was that they were being given very addictive medicines. The treatment for heroin addiction was methadone. Methadone was discovered by the Nazis in 1938 and used for severe wartime injury pain. And here we were using methadone 5 times as strong as heroin 60 years later in the late 1990s, because we weren't finding and fixing the causes. So once I realized that a third of heroin addicts had ADD, I then looked very carefully at every new addiction case I saw, and I found that there were about 10 common mental health disorders, and most addicts had 2 or 3 or 4 of them. The commonest was anxiety worry disorders, general anxiety, social anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, all sorts of phobias. And then there was sleep disorders. Many addicts had great difficulty sleeping. One who ended up committing suicide because he didn't know what to do in the early days claimed that he only slept about 6 hours a week, and he just got so fatigued and confused and distressed and despairing that he hung himself. The third common mental disorder was major depression. Major depression was very common cause of people turning to street drugs because antidepressants work so slowly, take 2, 3 or 4 weeks to start to work. Then there was bipolar disorder, which is sometimes being very depressed and sometimes being very racy and manic, swinging between the two. And then there was the ADD, ADHD, and then there was PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then there was what I called IAD because it didn't seem to have a name, and that was irritability, anger, violence disorder. Very common. A lot of domestic violence, with one woman in Australia being killed every 4 days by her partner or ex-partner, and so much domestic violence. So IAD was common and a big problem. And then there was very low self-esteem. A lot of people who had resorted to drugs had resorted to drugs because they felt so bad about themselves. They'd been born in very poor circumstances, had very poor parenting, very poor homes, and then
No excuse. I just want you to use me. Take me out.
You think you're gambling with World War III?
I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening here, but there's something gone wrong with the technology, which I'm trying to fix, not very successfully.
This is the terrifying moment.
By the
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Gold.
I'm not quite sure what happened, but something interrupted the technology, and I've been trying to restore it, but I don't seem to be able to restore it. But I'll continue talking because it may be working. Yeah, so the most important thing for having a good life is to be mentally healthy. And to be mentally healthy means to mostly have good feelings, good thinking, good habits, good relationships, and as a doctor in Perth, Western Australia, for 53 years, what I saw was that there was not nearly enough mental health care workers to provide all the care that was needed. The more well-off people could usually get mental health care, but most people with serious mental health problems ended up in the poor end of town, and it was very difficult for them to get help. There were two general problems. One was that there were lots of blind areas in mental health. In mental health, they didn't seem to look for causes, but it's to help people to get better and to not relapse. You need to find and help them as far as possible with their causes. They tended to treat people as individuals, as if they were isolated solo people, but mental health problems are nearly always family problems, and unless the treating healthcare professional and the patient understand their family problems and dynamics, it's very hard to help them to get better. If they get better but nothing changes in the family, they're likely to relapse. And there was, I never heard the word transgenerational trauma, and yet so much of today's mental ill health is due to very traumatic, distressing things that happened in the lives of the parents, the grandparents, or the great-grandparents. And any major traumas like deaths, divorces, bankruptcies, terrible motor car injuries caused epigenetic changes and emotional disturbances and thinking disturbances that affected the next 3 generations. And the other thing was that the tools, the mental health tools, were very weak. There are only 2 tools. Today we have tools for everything. Tools help us to do things more quickly, better, safer, lower cost, but there were only 2 tools in mental health, and they both had great weaknesses. The first tool was medicine, and medicine had 2 great weaknesses. The first was that so many medicines were addictive. The commonest mental health problem is worry, anxiety, and virtually all the medicines for worry, anxiety were addictive. Originally barbiturates, and then benzodiazepines and Ambien and Stilnox. And a common problem was sleep disorders, and virtually all the sleep medicines were addictive. And the common problem is ADD, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and the 3 main medicines for ADD Ritalin, dexamphetamine and Adderall, and because they were addictive, they were only allowed to be prescribed by specialists, by pediatricians or psychiatrists. And the great majority of people with mental health disorders, because of the employment and financial consequences, lived in the poor end of town where it was hard to find pediatricians and psychiatrists. And the other weakness of medicines is they're slow. When you take a tablet or a capsule, it takes half an hour to an hour to go right down your gut and start to be absorbed into your bloodstream and start to go to where it's needed and help you. Half an hour to an hour to start to work, and 1 to 2 hours before it's working strongly. And that's just too slow for many mental health problems and for addiction cravings. And the other tool was talk therapy, counseling, psychotherapy, CBT, whatever you like to call it, but basically talk therapy. And talk therapy had two weaknesses. Firstly, it was too slow. It took an hour to assess a new patient, and that's just too slow. We didn't have enough hours. And then with talk therapy, you had to see them every week for a half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, for weeks and weeks, months and months, sometimes for years. Too slow. And the second weakness of talk therapy is it's too costly. To be a therapist, you need at least a 4-year Bachelor of Psychology, and a lot of psychologists have a 6 or 7 year PhD. And to be a psychiatrist, you have to have a 6-year general medical degree, followed by a couple of years of general medical practice, and then 3, 4 or 5 years postgraduate psychiatric training and practice. So 10 or 12 years to become a psychiatrist. So those people were all very intelligent and had undertaken long training courses, so they were costly. They deserved to be paid well, and they needed to be paid well, or a lot of them would become lawyers or engineers or something else, and would be even shorter of mental health care workers. So talk therapy, too slow and too costly. Not even the governments can afford to pay for enough free mental health clinics. So the mental health clinics all have long waiting lists, and the longer a person has to wait to get help, the worse they get. On waiting lists, many people end up in hospital or committing crime and in prison or in a cemetery. So the tools were weak. So over 27 years, I spent a lot of time understanding the problems, the weaknesses, and finding solutions. In the late 1990s, we were having a terrible epidemic of heroin addiction, and people were dying all over the place from heroin overdoses. And some young people told me that they were the last person left standing, that all their friends had OD'd on heroin. So I thought I'd better learn about heroin, and I started to work 10 hours a week in an addiction clinic, which was 99% a heroin clinic. And I wanted to know what caused addiction. But they didn't know, in that clinic, they didn't know what caused addiction and didn't think they needed to know what caused addiction. They were just treating people. and the treatment didn't work very well. So people kept coming back again and again and again, and that created waiting lists. Then one day in that clinic I saw 15 heroin patients, and 5 of them had attention deficit disorder, ADD, ADHD, which was undiagnosed and untreated. And I realized that these people who'd had ADD problems, which are very difficult, from early childhood, had ended up in their teens or 20s or 30s turning to heroin to get relief from their suffering, and then became heroin addicts. So then I observed very carefully every new addiction patient I saw, and found that they all had 2 or 3 mental health disorders. There were about 10 common mental health disorders that I saw. The commonest was anxiety worry disorder, general anxiety, social anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, phobias of different sorts. And then a lot of them had severe sleep disorders and couldn't sleep, and hadn't been able to get effective treatment because all the sleep medicines were addictive, and eventually they turned to street drugs like heroin, which turned them into addicts. And the third common disorder was major depression. So many of them were suffering from severe depression, and antidepressants take 2, 3 or 4 weeks to start to work. So many of them turned to street drugs, which gave them immediate relief. Heroin relief in a few minutes, alcohol relief in an hour or two, addictive painkillers relief fairly quickly. As well as anxiety, worry disorders, sleep disorders, major depression, there was bipolar disorder, where people were sometimes very depressed and sometimes very high and fast. ADD, ADHD, which we've mentioned, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, people who had been through a horrible life-threatening experiences that caused great upheavals in them, with extreme anxiety, sweats, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, post-traumatic stress disorder, and then there was what I called post-traumatic evil focus, where people had such bad things happen to them that they couldn't cope, so they escaped from what the immediate problems by focusing on faraway problems in other places, like Guantanamo Bay or the CIA or conspiracy theories. A very unsuccessful strategy, because they end up that all the people they're associating with are also escaping from major disorders, and it's a very sick and sad scene. because the disorders are, those terrible disorders are not being fixed. They're being avoided. They're being escaped from, but they're still there. And then there was IAD, irritability, anger, violence disorder. A lot of people who were very angry and irritable, and some of whom were violent. One every 4 days, a woman in Australia was killed by her partner or an ex-partner because of irritability, anger, violence disorder. And then there was very low self-esteem. A lot of people had been born in very poor circumstances, had very poor parenting, poor homes, poor districts. The local school had a lot of troubled kids, a lot of playground fighting, so very low self-esteem, and then schizophrenia, and then autism. So these people, 95% of addicts had 2, 3 or 4 severe mental health disorders, and they needed what we call dual diagnosis. They needed their mental health disorders to be diagnosed and effectively treated at the same time as they had their addiction treated. And when I did dual diagnosis, that worked very well. It was much easier to get people better if the original cause problem was being fixed, and they were much less likely to relapse. But if their mental health illness was not being diagnosed and not being treated, which was the case in the great majority of cases, addicts were very difficult to get off their addiction, and they usually relapsed. And that was dealt with by putting heroin addicts on very addictive treatment, methadone. Methadone is about 5 times as addictive as heroin, and that was supposed to stop people from taking heroin, but research showed that half the people on methadone were still taking heroin when they can afford it, because methadone doesn't block heroin. So these people were sick, they needed dual diagnosis treatment, but the system, the whole mental health and addiction system was weak, because there were only 2 main tools: medicines and talk therapy, which both had great weaknesses. So many medicines were addictive, and swallowed tablets and capsules were so slow, and talk therapy was so slow, and it cost so much, because therapists had to be highly qualified people who needed to be paid well. And the other problem was that there were so many blind areas in mental health care. That a major blind area was they didn't look for causes, they didn't find and fix the causes. A major blind area was they treated people as isolated individuals, when mental health disorders are nearly always family health disorders, and unless the treating therapist and the person being treated understood the family problems of which they were part, it was very hard to fix them. And there was and I never heard transgenerational trauma mentioned, but so many of today's mental health cases are people who are suffering what's been passed down to them in their epigenetics and their chemistry by a very traumatized mother or father, or very traumatized grandparent, or even a very traumatized great-grandparent. In my family, a lot of the present-day problems dated from a great-grandmother who started to have babies when she was 16 and had had 4 sons by the time she was 22, when her alcoholic husband deserted her. And then at 24 she had the 5th child, a daughter, my grandmother, with a boyfriend, with someone she wasn't married to. And then she had another daughter who died young, whose father we are not sure of. And then at 30 she remarried and had 2 babies in 10 months, and then a 3rd baby. And then she died at 42 of cancer, obviously because all that stress and strain had depressed her immune system, which has allowed cancer to occur. So transgeneration trauma was a major cause of mental health disorders and addictions, which was a blind spot in mental health care. And there were many other blind areas in mental health care which caused mental health care to be ineffective, which caused many people to get no health care and many people to not get enough health care, and for health care to usually start far too late, because another blind spot was the failure to realize that a mental health problem is an emergency. If you deal with mental health care as soon as it starts, as soon as the person's marriage breaks up, or they have a terrible car or industrial accident, or they have unemployment and bankruptcy, or they lose their home or whatever, the earlier you start to treat the problem, the simpler it is, the easier it is to find the causes, and the faster you can help people to get better. But because of the stigma associated with mental ill health, and because of all the waiting lists, people were not getting treatment for their problems until they were 5, 10, 20 years old, by which time they'd caused many other problems and got deeply ingrained and took 10 or 20 times as much work to help, and often never got completely better, and caused long waiting lists where everybody else was getting worse. So over a 27-year period, I realized that what was needed was a complete pack of tools, highly effective tools that made mental health treatment effective, so that cut waiting lists, because people needed to get treated early. Their families needed to be treated, and they needed to do self-help, because if they couldn't get help, they couldn't get enough help, they needed to be able to help themselves. So the tools that I developed, the 7 tools that I developed, had to be tools that people could get to instantly. They just take their phone out, tap the App Store, the Google Play, and there they've got the tool. And the tool is simple and easy enough for people who were not doctors and not psychologists to be able to help themselves. So what were those tools? Well, a very important one was videos, because people need to understand their problems and what caused them and what will fix them. And having to explain that to everyone just took too much time. But there's no faster, more effective, better way of understanding your mental health disorders than to watch a video on it. And people wouldn't watch or stop watching 10-minute videos, so the videos had to be under-a-minute videos. So I eventually ended up with nearly 100 under-a-minute videos that covered every aspect of mental health and addiction. But each 1-minute video could only cover one thing. So different people had different problems which caused different problems. So which videos should they watch? So the next thing was websites that listed all the videos and gave information that they could read. And my first video was mentalhealthvideos.com, which was long and detailed, but then I had to make a short, fast website, and then I made smilefixit.com, which is one page, but on that page you can just tap a link to whatever is your problem. And that was made even more efficient by having an app. First I developed a 20-question checklist, which made things much faster, which one of my assistants could do, so that I could find out as much in 10 minutes by reading the checklist report and talking to the patient as I otherwise needed half an hour or more to do. But even checklists required people to make an appointment, come to the clinic, and required a second worker. So they had limitations. So then we developed an app, the Mental Fix-It app. The Mental Fix-It app, you can take out your phone, tap the App Store or Google Play button and download the free Mental Fix-It app in a few seconds. And then it tells you 4 things you need to know. The first thing it tells you is which 6 under-a-minute videos you can watch that will help your particular problems most. So you can watch those 6 under-a-minute videos in 6 minutes. So in 10 seconds or less, you download the app. In 2 minutes, you do the app questions, and in 6 minutes you watch the videos, the under-a-minute videos that will help you most. And the app also tells you which medicines are most likely to help you most, so you can go online and understand those medicines and think about them and talk to perhaps people who are on them. But of course you'll have to see a doctor to get a prescription, but you're much more likely to get the right medicine and the right doses and the right times if you've done that study. And the third thing, the Mental Fix-It app instant report gives you is a complete list of all the problems you've got, because people who've got one major mental health problem have always got others, usually 3, 4 or 5 other mental health problems, perhaps one or two big ones, a couple of medium ones, and a few smaller ones, but even the smaller ones are causing them trouble. And with slow talk therapy, you usually only get to the one or two big ones, and you don't get to the less important ones, but which are still significant. But with the app, the instant report gives you a total list of everything you've tapped on that's a problem, whether it's a minor, a moderate, or a severe problem, so you know everything. And then you start to work on the problems, and sometimes you can't cope with the biggest problem to begin with, so you start with one of the lesser problems, and every time you fix a lesser problem, you feel a bit happier, a bit stronger, and you're a bit better problem solver, and then the next problem you can do a bit quicker, until eventually you're feeling strong enough and happy enough, and you're experienced enough at problem solving to be able to deal with the big problems, the biggest problems. And the fourth thing, the app instant report gives you is a graph of your total scores. Each time you do the app, and we recommend you do it often, perhaps every day to begin with, and it lists all your problems with the score for each. It adds up all those scores and gives you a total score for that day, and then it puts that day's total score in a graph of total scores for all the previous times you've done the Mental Fix-It app, and you can see whether from the graph whether you're getting better or not. You sort of know whether you're getting better or not, but the graph is a much more exact indication that your treatment is working or it's not working. If you're on the good treatment that's working, your score is getting better and better and better. If your score is not getting better, the treatment you're on is not the right treatment, and you need to change the treatment. And that rapid feedback as to whether you're getting better or not, whether the treatment is working or not, whether the things that are happening in your life are helpful or unhelpful, that rapid feedback helps you to get the best treatment quickly and to get better quickly. So videos, websites, the Mental Fix-It app, and then live streaming, because there's so many people do live streaming, go online and watch lots and lots of live streaming looking for help. So I now do live streaming 4 times a week on Wednesday, Friday and Saturday evening, 7 p.m. Perth time, which is 9 p.m. Sydney and Melbourne time, and 7 a.m. New York time, 4 a.m. Los Angeles time. So I now also do the Sunday session at 9 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. so that the Sunday session is at a reasonable hour for the Northern Hemisphere, because sometimes the Northern Hemisphere there are as many people in the Northern Hemisphere in the US, Canada, the UK, Sweden, Oslo, watching our live streamings. So we do the Sunday live streaming at 9 a.m. and maybe I'll have to change the live streaming time of some of the other occasions to a more northern hemisphere friendly time. The fifth tool is powder medicine. Why powder medicine? Because when you drop thousands of tiny grains of powder medicine on your tongue and suck it, don't swallow it, it starts to work in 5 minutes. And starting to work in 5 minutes is so much more helpful for lots of mental health problems like panic attacks or social phobia or post-traumatic stress disorder or irritability, anger, violence disorder. Speed is so much more helpful for those mental health disorders, and it's so much more helpful for trying to prevent using addictive drugs. Mental health, so many mental health disorders are basically bad habits. They're things that happen so often that the underlying triggers and electrical messages through the brain and nerves and chemical messages through the brain and glands and blood have become stronger and stronger and stronger and more easily triggered until they're habits, and they just happen very easily, very often. How do you break bad habits? You break bad habits by weakening the triggers and the underlying electrical messages in the nerves and chemical messages in the blood, and you weaken them by delaying them. If you delay doing a habit, that weakens it a little bit, and you weaken it by doing a little less of it. And when you weaken a habit by delaying doing it and by doing a little bit less of it, then the habit messages and triggers get weaker, and then you can delay them and do less of them, delay them even longer and do even less of them, which weakens them further until you can start to sometimes not do them, and when you don't do them, that weakens habits a lot. So for example, with smoking tobacco kills 7 million people a year in the world, and for every one it kills, it causes dozens or hundreds of people's lives to be ruined. So stopping smoking is very, very important. And what we do is with powder medicines in a pocket dispenser, we can drop the right powder on our tongue anytime, anywhere in seconds. Just whiz it out of your pocket and drop it on your tongue in seconds, and in 5 minutes it's starting to be absorbed if you've sucked it, not swallowed it. And that delaying and weakening and doing less of the smoking habit enables you to reduce it, comfortably reduce it by about a quarter every couple of weeks, and then you can reduce it another quarter in another couple of weeks, and then by delaying it even longer, by delaying each smoke even longer and smoking even less, chucking half the cigarette away, in maybe 6 weeks you can reduce smoking by 3/4, and by that time the habit and the craving is so weak that in 8, 10 or 12 weeks you can just quit smoking. Now, a lot of people should say you should just go cold turkey. Ronald Reagan's wife, I think it was, said just say no. But going cold turkey is so hard that it's not very often successful, and people often relapse. Something happens after they've stopped the bad habit for a few weeks or a few months that causes them to do the habit just once. One cigarette and they're gone. One shot of heroin and they're gone. Powder medicines in pocket dispensers are our fifth and sixth tools, and they're very powerful. And powder medicines have the advantage that if they taste good, you develop taste conditioning. You may have heard of Pavlov's dog. 100 years ago, Pavlov, a Russian scientist, discovered conditioning in dogs when they got meat. Well, you can establish taste conditioning by having tasty powder, and when you get taste conditioning after a few weeks, as soon as you taste the powder medicine, as soon as it lands on your tongue and gets your taste buds, it starts to work, and it starts to work strongly in 5 to 10 minutes, and that even more powerfully reduces mental health bad habits and addiction bad habits. And also with powders, you can easily mix 2, 3 or 4 powders together, which give you a much more powerful effect. If you have got 2, 3 or 4 mental health disorders, which most people with mental health disorders have, and you've also got an addiction, then one medicine, slow acting tablet or capsules, not going to help you very much. So that can be partly overcome by having 3 different tablets or capsules, but that's expensive because each item is a separate prescription which costs money, and people tend to get them mixed up. But 2, 3 or 4 powder medicines are not much more expensive than one powder medicine, and they give you relief from 2, 3 or 4 mental health disorders and your addiction craving, which is powerful. The 7th tool the heartbeat meditation aid. Meditation is so valuable for people with mental health and addiction problems, but the problem is that the people who would most benefit from meditation and have the worst problems often can't learn to meditate. In meditation, you focus on something and stop thinking about all your problems, which gives you a rest, a break, and helps you get stronger and refreshed, and then you can beat your problems better. But the things that meditation teachers teach you to focus on are either a word, and you keep repeating that word, or they teach you to focus on your breathing. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And a word and breathing are not strong enough mind-grabbing things to maintain your focus and allow you to stop thinking about your problems. So people with big problems, a lot of agitation, can have great difficulty or not be able to learn to meditate. So I'd been listening to people's heartbeats with stethoscopes for 50 years and realized that heartbeat sounds are loud and clear and very interesting. So I cut short a stethoscope so people can now put the stethoscope in. This is the hearing part, and you put the hearing part down under your clothes, over your heart on the upper left side of your chest, and you listen to that loud, strong, regular heartbeat, and it's much easier to learn to meditate doing that. And once you've learned to meditate with a heartbeat meditation aid, you can gradually convert to meditating by focusing on your breathing, which is the best, because you take your breathing wherever you are, and in a moment you can focus on your breathing. And breathing is very closely related to a lot of emotional disturbances. When you get a shock, something bad, you gasp and you hold your breath. If you can learn to breathe steadily, that helps your emotional condition, and it helps you to sleep, which is very important with mental health disorders. And I've got a few other tools in the pipeline. This is a first prototype of a pocket powder medicine dispenser, but it gives 1 to 1 1/4 ml doses of not medicine, but very tasty fruit powder. The medicine dispensers only give 0.2 of a ml, and that's not enough to get a good taste. But we're going to use being able to have a lovely taste of harmless, very enjoyable fruit powder anytime, anywhere, to help make new good habits and break bad old habits. If every time you think about doing the new habit, or you start to do the new habit, you give yourself a lovely taste, that makes doing the new habit easier and more enjoyable, and you do it more often, and the more often you do it, the sooner the new activity is a firmly entrenched habit. So rapid, enjoyable taste from a pocket powder medicine dispenser can help you to reinforce activities and make them into helpful habits. And you can use a very nice taste to break bad habits. Like every time you start to get anxious with social phobia or general anxiety or panic attack, you can just whiz out and put a lovely taste of powder on your tongue and focus on that. And focusing on that really nice thing helps you to delay whatever the bad habit is, and to take a bit less of the bad habit. And when you do that, that weakens that bad habit. And so as you continue to use the lovely taste to delay and reduce the bad habit gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and soon you can sometimes miss doing it, and then it gets much weaker, and then eventually you can stop doing it. So couple of other tools in the pipeline which I won't tell you about until they're more developed, but they're very exciting. Tools, self-help, and starting as soon as a problem starts is going to revolutionize mental health care. Everybody's going to be able to get enough mental health care and to get it early and to do much more for themselves, which is so good. Well, I think that's enough for today. Sorry about the technology problem. I don't know what it was and I couldn't fix it, but I'll be back again on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Perth time and Friday and Saturday at 7 p.m. Perth time, and next Sunday again at 9 a.m. Perth time. Oh, and please send me your comments, questions and criticisms, and I'll try to respond.